Hey guys, tonight we slip into a medieval village where the morning hasn't even broken yet. And you're already trudging across packed dirt floors, toes curling against the chill that seeps through from the earth below. The air is still heavy with night, and the moon hasn't completely surrendered. But you can hear the faint stirrings of roosters clearing their throats for a dawn chorus. This is the moment when the baker, the unsung alarm clock of the community, pulls himself from scratchy wool blankets, rubs sleep from bleary eyes, and steels himself for another day of coaxing life from flour and fire. You probably won't survive this schedule, by the way. No 9 to 5, no weekend lines. No, I'll just Uber Eats a croissant. The baker's clock is brutal. It starts before the first cockcrow, when even the most responsible medieval farmer is still drooling into his straw pillow. And unlike you who can claim not a morning person as an excuse, the baker has no such luxury. If bread isn't ready by mid-morning, the entire village revolts. Well, maybe not pitchforks and torches, but plenty of passive-aggressive stares in church. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're rewatching from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. It's oddly comforting to imagine someone in Tokyo yawning along while someone else in Paris is half asleep. And here we all are sharing this strange midnight bakery. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The baker stretches his arms, joints popping like dry twigs. His little cottage smells faintly of smoke from last night's hearth, mixed with wool grease and damp straw. You can imagine the sound of a dog shifting in the corner, giving a disgruntled snuffle. The world outside is still black, and the only light inside comes from a small oil lamp, its flame flickering nervously as if aware it's about to be upstaged by dawn. You shuffle after him as he pulls on coarse linen, cinches it with a belt that has seen better days, and laces shoes that are more patches than leather. Already, he's thinking ahead. Did yesterday's grain grind fine enough? Is there enough water drawn? Has the communal oven been fired yet? Sleep is no longer a luxury, it's a calculation. And here's a mainstream historical fact to ground us. In medieval Europe, bread wasn't just food, it was survival. In many regions, it made up over half of the average person's calories. Without bread, diets collapsed. Grain shortages weren't just inconvenient, they caused famine, riots, and, sometimes, regime changes. The baker wasn't a fancy artisan. He was closer to a lifeline. You step outside with him into air so cold it almost crackles. The street is narrow, lined with cottages leaning together like gossiping old women. Somewhere, a dog barks, distant and hollow. Above you, the stars are still visible, though paling, and a smear of pale light teases the horizon. The village is hushed, but you know behind shuttered windows, people stir in sleep, trusting that bread will appear by the time they need it. Our baker, though, doesn't walk with saintly purpose. He mutters. His breath forms little clouds that vanish too quickly. He might even swear softly when he stubs a toe on a frozen rut in the path. The medieval world looks romantic from the outside, but remember, this man hasn't had coffee. The best he can hope for is a sip of weak ale to cut the thirst. Historians still argue whether bakers were more respected or more resented in small villages. On the one hand, people relied on them, trusted them, lined up at their door. On the other hand, bakers were sometimes accused of cheating using less grain, padding the loaves with beans, even adding chalk or sawdust in lean times. Town records are full of fines and punishments for bakers caught short-weighting bread. In some places, they could be pilloried in the square. Imagine explaining that to your boss. Sorry I was late, got locked in public stocks again. He ducks into a small shed where the air is instantly warmer, thanks to the faint embers of yesterday's fire still whispering in the hearth. He squats down, pokes at them, and you hear the gentle hiss as new kindling catches. Light fills the room in little bursts, like nervous applause. Soon, the glow will guide his hands through hours of labor. Here comes a quirky tidbit. Medieval bakers often slept right beside their ovens, partly to save time, partly to make sure the fire never truly died. Can you imagine dozing with one ear open, listening for the sigh of ash or the crackle of flame? It wasn't exactly a cozy bedtime routine, but it meant bread was less likely to burn, or worse, never bake at all. You crouch beside him, watching as he sets out his tools. A rough wooden trough, a stone jar, a basket covered with cloth. Each item has been handled so many times it feels like part of him. He doesn't need to think his hands remember what to do. The way yours might remember the unlock pattern on your phone. His remember the rhythm of kneading, the precise sprinkle of salt, the careful handling of yeast. Except he doesn't even call it yeast. To him, it's the sour living lump of starter passed from baker to baker, family to family, almost like a pet. If it dies, everyone goes hungry. You sit in the corner, watching the flame grow. And you realize how strange it is that bread, a thing so basic, so everyday, demands this much ritual before dawn. The hours of preparation ahead are long, and honestly, you'd have quit already. The warmth of the fire tempts you to curl up, snooze a little, maybe dream of pancakes. But the baker straightens, dusts his hands, and begins. The village is counting on him. There's humor in it, too. Imagine him as the medieval version of a barista. You know how coffee shops have that one customer who hovers impatiently, glaring at the espresso machine. Replace the espresso with an oven the size of a cart, and that's your medieval villager. "Where's my loaf, Hans? I saw you put it in 10 minutes ago. Shouldn't it be done?" And Hans Sauerbaker has to smile and nod while secretly imagining beaning the guy with a baguette. And yet, beneath the grumbles, there's pride. Bread is more than food. It's a shared heartbeat. When the smell drifts through the village later, it will mean comfort, community, and survival. But right now, before dawn, it's just a tired man standing in front of a fire, already neck-deep in tomorrow's expectations. The horizon blushes faintly pink. Birds begin to stir. And as you rub your own eyes, yawning, you realize this was just the warm-up. The grain isn't even ground yet. Hours of labor stand between this chilly moment and the golden loaf that will steam on a wooden table. Time moves differently here. Bread doesn't hurry, and neither can you. The fire still murmurs in the baker's hearth. But now comes the task that will anchor the rest of the day. Grain into flour. You follow him outside again, where a sack of barley and wheat waits by the doorway, drawn from the communal granary. The sack isn't knit-tit bulges like it's been stuffed by someone late for a wedding, tied with a fraying cord that looks like it could give out any second. Still, this is the treasure chest of the medieval village. Without it, there's no bread, no beer, no life. You lean down, lift a handful of kernels. They're surprisingly small, tiny nuggets of pale gold. They smell faintly sweet, dusty, like summer air trapped in a shell. But eating them raw would be like chewing gravel. The magic only happens once they're ground into flour, and that requires work that your modern arms would protest after 10 minutes. Inside the dim shed, the quernstone waits. 2 discs of rock, one fixed below, the other ready to turn above it. At the center is a hole where the grain will be poured. A wooden peg juts from the top stone, worn smooth by countless hands that have pushed, pulled, and sweated over it. The baker doesn't work alone. His wife and daughter step in, faces still heavy with sleep, hair in loose braids. This part of the process is rarely solitary. Grinding is a family business. You set your hands on the peg, feel the stone's cool roughness, and push. It groans like an old man as it begins to rotate, heavy and stubborn. The rhythm is slow. Drop the grain in, push, pull, turn. The kernels crack under the pressure, breaking down into something finer. It's not the white, cloud-soft flour you imagine from a modern bakery. No, this is coarse, speckled, and uneven, full of bits that will make the bread chewy and dense. You cough as dust rises, coating your throat with a bitterness that no amount of ale will quite wash down. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In most medieval villages, hand querns were the backbone of flour production until watermills and windmills spread widely. Even then, many families still used small stones at home for daily batches. Grinding was so essential that some lords even claimed a monopoly on it, forcing peasants to use the lord's mill and pay a fee, called multure. Avoiding that fee could earn you a fine, or worse, confiscation of your quern stone. Imagine the scandal. We caught him moonlighting with a secret grinder. You push again, shoulders aching. The top stone resists, then grudgingly slides forward, squealing faintly against the lower one. Dust floats through the lamplight like golden smoke. The baker wipes his brow. He's done this so many times, his arms have built a rhythm, almost a dance. Lean in, pull back, breathe, lean again. You try to match it, but your movements are clumsy. Within minutes, you're sweating as though you've run laps around the village green. There's humor in the monotony, though. Think of the medieval dad jokes that probably floated around. If you keep grinding that slowly, the bread will be ready for next Easter. Or, at least you'll have arms like a knight by the time you're done. The work is endless. And when you joke, it's the only way to keep sane. Historians still argue whether this grinding was mainly women's work or evenly shared. Some records suggest women spent several hours a day at the quern, their backs bowed, hands raw from stone. Others point out that men often joined in, especially when larger batches were needed. Either way, the quern's dull groan was the background music of the medieval household, steady, persistent, inescapable. Now, a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists sometimes find deep grooves worn into cottage floors near where querns once sat. Imagine that: centuries of grinding, bodies rocking back and forth, leaving permanent hollows in wooden planks or packed clay. A family's history literally pressed into the ground by the weight of flour making. You glance down now, and yes, the earth beneath your knees feels smoother, hollowed, like a bowl carved by time itself. The pile of flour grows, slowly, agonizingly. A bowl half full feels like a victory. Though you know the village expects much more. Each loaf demands pounds of the stuff, and loaves are not small. By now your arms are jelly, your breath shallow, and you mutter to yourself about treadmills being overrated torture devices. Yet at least they don't demand you feed them grain. And here's another joke your mind supplies. Medieval CrossFit. Instead of kettlebells, you just lug a sack of barley and grind it until your muscles give out. No need for memberships, just pray for harvest to fail so you get fewer reps. The baker hums softly, maybe a psalm, maybe a folk tune. His daughter giggles when you sneeze, flour exploding from your nose like you're trying out for some sort of village clown show. Even in this grinding monotony, there are small sparks of warmth. The family isn't grinding grain just for money, they're grinding out their daily survival. And they've learned to weave small comforts into the endless repetition. After an hour, your arms ache in places you didn't know existed. You glance outside, the horizon is brighter now, a wash of pale silver. The village stirs. A cart rattles past, chickens cluck, a dog shakes out its coat. Life is waking, and still you grind. The sack empties slowly. Kernels vanish into dust. Dust becomes meal. Meal piles into baskets. The daughter takes a turn, then the mother. Each works in silence, broken by mutters about how coarse the stone is grinding today. You begin to notice patterns, the feel of stone grinding smoother when it catches just right, the way the handle creaks on one side but not the other, the faint vibration that runs up your arms like a pulse. This is the medieval equivalent of scrolling endlessly through your phone feed. Mind-numbing, repetitive, but necessary to survive. And just like your phone, it eats hours you didn't notice passing. Here's something rarely mentioned. Not all grains were equal. Wheat was prized but often too expensive for peasants. Barley, rye, and oats made up much of the daily bread. Sometimes these were mixed so-called maslin bread. It filled bellies but was rougher, darker, heavier. The elite got fluffy white loaves. Everyone else chewed their way through bricks disguised as dinner. You can almost feel your jaw tightening at the thought. Okay, pause. The baker leans back, stretches, cracks his knuckles. He picks up a kernel, bites it, crunch. His eyes narrow. Too much husk still in the mix. He grumbles, pours more grain, sets the stone turning again. Bread may be common, but it demands stubborn perfection. Too coarse, and the dough won't bind. Too fine, and the bread collapses. Balance, always balance. By the time the last handful of grain vanishes into the quorn's hungry mouth, your body is buzzing with exhaustion. Sweat dampens your shirt, flour streaks your cheeks. You look like a ghost who lost a fight in a bakery. The family laughs quietly. They've seen this transformation countless times. It's part of the ritual. First comes grain, then flour, then bread, then nourishment. The baskets are heavy now, filled with pale dust that smells faintly nutty, earthy, alive. You run your fingers through it, marveling at how something so small and fragile as a kernel becomes a pile capable of feeding a household. It feels almost like magic, not flashy, wand-waving magic, but the kind you barely notice until you stop and realize you're holding tomorrow in your hands. Outside, the sun peaks above the horizon. Its rays slant into the shed, lighting up the flour motes drifting in the air. They glitter like gold dust, swirling in currents you can't quite see. The baker pauses, wipes his brow, and smiles faintly. For the first time this morning, there's progress. The grain is ground, the flour is ready. The first step of bread's long journey is done. Though you slump against the wall, wondering how villagers survived doing this every single day. No gym memberships, no ergonomic chairs, no protein shakes. Just stone, grain, and muscle. You wouldn't last a week. And yet, strangely, you feel proud. You've helped shape the flour that will soon rise, bake, and feed an entire family. It's a small victory, but in medieval life, that's what survival is. Small victories stacked like loaves on a wooden table. The baker gathers the baskets, hefts them with a grunt, and glances at you. His look says, wordlessly, tired already. We've barely started. You sigh, dust yourself off, and follow. The flour may be ready, but bread is still hours away. The journey has only begun. The baskets, of course, flour sit waiting, quiet as newborn lambs. But flour alone doesn't make bread. Without water, it's just dust good for coughing, bad for eating. So now comes the next task. Fetching water from the village well. The baker nods to you, handing over a wooden bucket that looks like it's survived more centuries than your local library. Its hoops of iron are rusted, the wood swollen and cracked from years of soaking. It smells faintly of moss and smoke, and you wonder how many generations of villagers have gripped its handle. The baker gives a half smile, the sort that says, yes, you're about to regret every life choice that led you here. You step outside into the morning air. The village is waking. Chickens squawk and flap in the mud. Pigs grunt as they nose through scraps, and a cart rumbles past, its wheels chewing deep ruts into the street. The smell of manure, smoke, and yesterday's fish bones all blend into a perfume so powerful you can practically chew it. Forget Chanel, this is Ode to Medieval Tuesday. The well sits in the center of the village, where cottages lean together like gossiping neighbors. Stone rim is worn smooth by centuries of elbows and rope. A wooden beam stretches across it with a thick rope dangling down into the darkness. You hear the creak of the pulley before you even get close. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Most medieval villages had a communal well, not private ones. Wells were lifelines, fiercely protected. In times of siege, whoever controlled the water controlled survival. In peaceful times, The well was the village's water cooler literally and socially. News spread there faster than smoke in a chimney. You grip the rope, lower the bucket. The pulley moans, the rope scrapes your palm. Down it goes, into blackness, until at last you hear the hollow splash. You pull, straining as the bucket rises, dripping, heavier than you expected. The rope burns your hands, water sloshes, and by the time you set it on the stone rim, your arms are trembling. And that's just one bucket. Now comes the fun part, carrying it back. The bucket swings, water splashes onto your shoes, and every step feels like dragging a stubborn toddler. Medieval villagers must have developed legs of steel just from this daily commute. You take a few careful steps and already curse gravity. Historians still argue whether villagers rationed water heavily or used it more freely. Some evidence suggests that households reused water repeatedly for cooking, cleaning, even brewing it till it turned murky and suspicious. Others argue that wells provided enough abundance to be practical, at least in wetter climates. Either way, fetching water wasn't a quick trip to the fridge, it was labor carved into the rhythm of the day. You pause halfway back, panting, water dripping down your wrist. The road is muddy, churned by cartwheels and hooves, and your shoes sink with each step. A goose honks aggressively, as though it owns the path. Spoiler, it does. All geese own whatever ground they stand on. You sidestep quickly, clutching the bucket like a medieval version of Don't Spill the Coffee. Here's a quirky tidbit. Wells were often believed to be inhabited by spirits. Some villagers whispered that tossing a coin or piece of bread into the well would keep the water pure. Others feared that angering the spirit could sour the taste or even dry it up. So if you see the baker mumbling under his breath as he draws water, don't laugh, he's just hedging his bets with the unseen landlord of the well. By the time you stagger back into the baker's cottage, your shoulders ache, your arms buzz. And half the bucket's contents have baptized the dirt road. The baker glances inside, frowns at the low level, and sighs. Wordlessly, he hands you the bucket again. Of course, it will take several trips to gather enough. Bread is thirsty work. So back you go, trudging through mud, dodging animals, and exchanging nods with villagers. Some wave, some barely glance up. For them, fetching water is so ordinary, it doesn't even register. For you, it feels like training for a medieval Olympics, except the prize isn't a medal, it's just damp socks. The second trip feels worse. Your arms, already sore from grinding grain, now burn with every pull of the rope. The pulley squeals mockingly, like it knows you're weak. You yank the rope too fast, and the bucket bashes against the stone, spilling half its contents back into the dark. You mutter words that would get you fined in the parish court. And yet there's something calming about the repetition. Lower, splash, haul, carry. The rhythm steadies your breath, focuses your mind. The village swirls around you. The smell of bread baking faintly at another oven. The laughter of children chasing each other through mud. The clatter of hooves as a messenger rides past. All of it stitched together by this simple act of bringing water from the earth. You remember suddenly the flour waiting in baskets back at the cottage. Dry, lifeless, waiting for this liquid breath to awaken it. Without water, dough is impossible. The thought almost makes the bucket feel lighter. Almost. At the third trip, you pause at the well and glance down into its depths. Cool air rises, damp and earthy. You imagine the generations of villagers who have leaned over this same rim, drawn from the same black pool. Some likely dropped things, rings, knives, even unlucky chickens. The water down there has secrets. You wouldn't be surprised if it's laughing at you. Joke number 2 of the day bubbles up. Medieval CrossFit Level 2 bucket carries. Instead of dumbbells, just haul 50 pounds of water through mud while geese heckle you. Bonus points if you don't fall face first into the muck. By the time you return with the final bucket, your body feels like soggy bread dough. Arms limp, back aching, calves burning. You stagger through the door, slosh the water into a barrel, and collapse against the wall. The baker grunts approvingly, which is his way of saying, "Well done." No gold star, no applause. Just a grunt. You take what you can get. The family gathers now. The flour waits in its baskets. The water glistens in the barrel. Tools lie ready. The baker's wife checks the fire again, adds a log. The daughter brushes flour from her sleeves. Everything is in place. And you're drenched in sweat, streaked with mud, and beginning to wonder if bread is worth it. Spoiler, it is, but your muscles might disagree. As you wipe your forehead, you realize something. This step-fetching water took as long as grinding grain, maybe longer. In your world, water is invisible, summoned by a twist of a tap. Here, it's a commodity, a burden, a daily negotiation with earth and muscle. You never thought you'd envy a kitchen faucet, but right now, you'd kiss one if it appeared. The baker dips a hand into the barrel, lifts a palmful, and lets it drip back. His face softens, satisfied. Enough water to make the dough pliable, enough to feed the yeast, enough to bind flour into bread. He glances at you again, eyes twinkling. The unspoken question hovers, still keeping up. And you nod, even though your body screams. Because deep down, you know this is only the beginning. Flour and water are ready, but there's kneading ahead. And kneading makes everything you've done so far feel like child's play. The baker wipes his hands on his apron, steps toward the trough, and pours the first scoop of flour inside. The water waits. The air seems to pause, as though the entire village leans in to watch. The bread's true birth is about to begin. And you exhale, bracing yourself. Because if you thought grinding grain and hauling buckets were exhausting, just wait until you're elbow deep in sticky dough. The trough waits like a hungry mouth, rough-hewn from a single plank of wood. It's been used for years, maybe decades, its surface polished by flour, water, and sweat. You can see faint cracks in the grain of the timber, scars of past loaves. The baker gestures for you to stand close, his face serious. This part is no joke. The bread begins to take shape now, and it demands commitment, no halfway measures, no lazy pushes. He scoops a mound of flour into the trough, and it sits there like a snowdrift, pale and silent. Then comes the water, poured in slowly, glugging from the bucket you just hauled. It spreads through the flour, darkening the powder into damp patches. The smell shifts immediately, no longer just dry grain dust, but something earthy and alive, like wet fields after rain. You watch as the baker reaches for a small lump wrapped in cloth. The starter. This is the soul of the bread, a living culture passed down, fed and nurtured like a family heirloom. He pinches off a piece and crumbles it into the mix. To you, it looks unimpressive, just a grayish, sticky lump. But without it, there'd be no rise, no air, no life in the loaf. Medieval people didn't know about yeast cells, but they knew this starter worked, and that was enough. He nods at you. Your turn. You plunge your hands into the trough. The sensation is immediate and overwhelming. Cold water, sticky flour clinging to your skin, lumps squishing between your fingers. You try to stir, but it's like wrestling with a swamp. Your hands vanish into gluey resistance, and every movement sticks and tugs. Push, the baker mutters. Fold, again. So you push, fold, again and again. The dough resists like it has a grudge. It stretches reluctantly, then snaps back. Your fingers ache, your wrists burn. Flour streaks your arms, clings to your clothes. Within minutes, you're coated in a second skin of paste, like some tragic papier. Cho project gone rogue. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Kneading wasn't just mixing knit, was essential for developing gluten, the network of proteins that give bread its structure. Medieval bakers didn't use that word, but they knew the feel. Dough had to be stretched, worked, and pummeled until it gained strength. Without it, The bread collapsed into a sad, dense lump that even pigs might snub. You push harder, folding the mass over itself, leaning your weight into it. The trough creaks. Your breath comes short. This is labor, not cooking. Sweat drips down your nose, lands on the dough. You laugh weakly extra salt. Perhaps. The baker doesn't even blink. He's seen worse. Historians still argue whether medieval kneading was done mostly by hand or sometimes by feet. Yes, feet. In larger bakeries, workers stomped dough in troughs with clean, hopefully clean, bare feet, pressing and stretching with their whole body weight. It sounds horrifying to your modern sensibilities, but honestly, after 10 minutes of hand kneading, you'd gladly throw your socks off and start stomping too. Efficiency beats pride when survival's on the line. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval laws actually regulated how dough could be handled. In parts of France, bakers were forbidden from kneading dough with their feet after too many complaints of unpleasant flavors. Imagine the town council sitting around a table, sighing and drafting an ordinance that basically says, "Please stop stepping on the bread, peer." You try to imagine that now, as your hands sink deeper into the sticky mass. Feet or hands, it hardly matters, this dough wants to fight you. It stretches in strings that snap and slap back at your wrists. You grunt, push, fold again. Your arms throb. You feel muscles you didn't know existed. This is less recipe, more workout routine. The baker demonstrates. He slams the dough against the trough wall, folds it sharply, then pushes with the heel of his palm. You mimic him, slamming the sticky lump. It makes a sound like a wet drum. You laugh, imagining a medieval rock band with dough percussion. The baker doesn't laugh, but his daughter does, stifling a giggle behind her hand. The air grows warmer. The fire in the hearth glows, filling the cottage with a smoky heat. Your shirt sticks to your back. Your breath fogs the air. Tea. Dough grows smoother under your hands, less like glue, more like a pliable muscle. You sense the change without being told. The dough is alive, shifting from stubborn to cooperative. You keep folding. Push, stretch, slam. Your body aches, but the rhythm takes over. It's almost hypnotic, the steady thud, the pull and fold, the resistance yielding bit by bit. Your thoughts drift. You think of the villagers who will eat this bread tonight, breaking it into bowls of pottage, dipping it into ale, handing crusts to children. Every push of your palm is another step toward feeding them. Another historical aside. In many medieval towns, bakers were sworn to honesty about their loaves' weight and quality. Officials called breadweighers tested loaves to ensure they weren't short on flour or secretly watered down. Failure could result in fines or public humiliation. So kneading wasn't just personal pride, was monitored, judged, and punished if done poorly. Imagine the pressure of knowing your sloppy kneading could land you in stocks. Your arms feel like wet ropes now, limp and useless. You glance at the baker, silently pleading for mercy. He inspects the dough, pinches it, nods. Enough. Relief floods you. You sag against the trough, covered in flour, sweat, and streaks of sticky paste that will never fully wash out of your hair. You look like you lost a mud wrestling contest with porridge. The baker's wife covers the dough with a cloth. "It rests now," she says simply. You stare at the trough, at the lumpy, heavy mass inside. It looks unremarkable, just a blob. But beneath the cloth, change has begun. The yeast will stretch and breathe, filling the dough with tiny pockets of air. What feels dead now will soon rise. And here's where the humor sneaks back in. You think of all the artisan bread in modern bakeries, kneaded by mixers, risen in temperature-controlled ovens, sold with fancy labels like rustic farmhouse. If those bakers ever spent a single morning like this, covered in glue, sweat dripping, muscles screaming, they'd probably slap Survivor's loaf on the tag and charge double. The baker pours you a cup of weak ale. You gulp it down, grateful, even though it tastes faintly of yesterday's bucket. He doesn't apologize. Medieval life doesn't pamper. He sits by the fire, wiping his hands. You slump beside him, every part of your body humming with exhaustion. The dough, though, is silent. Under its cloth, it rests, expands, shifts. You lean closer, swear you can almost hear it sighing, a faint crackle as bubbles form. It's alive now, and it's not waiting for you. It will rise on its own schedule, slow and stubborn. Bread teaches patience. You've done your part for now. But there's no escaping the knowledge. This was only kneading. Tomorrow and the day after and the day after, we'll be back at it, grinding, hauling, kneading, sweating. Bread isn't a recipe, it's a rhythm, a heartbeat that repeats endlessly, demanding labor with no shortcuts. You stretch your aching arms, stare at the cloth-covered trough, and think, if bread were easy, it wouldn't be sacred. And so you sit, listening to the fire crackle, smelling smoke and flour, feeling your muscles ache. You've wrestled the dough into submission. Now you wait for it to wrestle with time. The dough rests beneath a coarse cloth, pale and unassuming. But already it is alive. You hover nearby, hands tucked into your lap, watching. The cottage is quiet now, except for the occasional crackle of the hearth fire, and your own breath, slow and uneven. You're aware, almost painfully, that the dough will rise on its own timetable. Your modern instincts scream at you to hurry, to stir, to check, to push control the process. But here, in a medieval village, bread moves on its own clock. The warmth of the hearth reaches you, a gentle, smoky embrace, and the cottage smells of flour, water, and yeast that's just beginning to breathe. The dough sits on its board, a humble mound, but to the villagers it is a marvel. To watch it expand is to witness transformation, a mixture of humble ingredients swelling with potential, alive beneath the cloth. It's almost magical, and in some ways it is. Occasionally, a neighbor peers in, curious or concerned. "What's that lump under the cloth?" they whisper. "Will it eat us all if we stare too long?" You laugh quietly. Even in simple tasks, superstition lingers. In medieval life, anything that seems a little too alive-like, rising dough invites gossip. Historians still argue whether these small rituals around a covering it, whispering blessings, guarding it from evil eyes were truly magical or simply practical. Covering dough kept dust and insects out, maintained warmth, and prevented it from drying. But villagers imbued these actions with meaning. You can almost imagine someone muttering, "God help us if the dough shrinks overnight while crossing themselves." You watch as the dough swells, faint bubbles pushing at the cloth. You reach out to touch it, but the baker's hand stops you. "Patience," he murmurs, voice low and steady. You nod, though your fingers itch to prod. The texture is changing beneath the surface. The sticky mass you wrestled with hours ago is becoming soft, elastic, and responsive. It's no longer just DeWitt's a living thing, and it demands respect. The cottage grows warmer, the smell of flour and yeast mingling with smoke from the hearth. You lean back, arms crossed, trying to soothe the ache from yesterday's grinding, this morning's water hauling, and the kneading that left your hands raw. All of it, the labor, the sweat, the effort, has led to this moment of quiet observation. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval bakers believed that talking to dough would encourage it to rise. You can almost see it, children and adults alike, whispering sweet nothings to their future loaves, bending over wooden boards as if communicating with a shy pet. Perhaps it was placebo, perhaps it was comfort. Either way, you're tempted to whisper a rise, little lump, rise. Yourself. Time stretches. Minutes fold into hours. Your modern mind struggles with the pace. In your world, waiting is an inconvenience. Here, waiting is essential. You sip from a small cup of weak ale the baker poured earlier, the warmth trickling down your throat, grounding you. Outside, the village noise ebbs and flows. A cart rattles past, a rooster crows, children shriek with laughter. Inside, you remain with the dough, watching it expand imperceptibly, marveling at the silent power of yeast at work. A cat slips into the corner. You freeze. It eyes the dough with dangerous intent. The baker notices immediately and shoos it away with a practiced hand. "Not today. Pause," he says, muttering. You suppress a laugh. Even the animals understand that this rising lump is sacred territory. Cats, of course, are persuasive creatures, their eyes always calculating. You can't help but imagine the dough as a prize in a medieval reality show called Who Wants to Steal My Loaf? As the hours pass, the dough swells further. You see bubbles forming beneath the surface, tiny eruptions of air that will give the bread its light texture. The transformation is slow, deliberate, and beautiful in its subtlety. Every bubble is a promise, every rise a whisper of tomorrow's sustenance. Watching it, you realize how unlike modern life this is. No instant gratification, no timers, no notifications. Just patience, observation, and trust in unseen forces. Historians still argue whether communal knowledge about dough fermentation was based more on observation or on superstition. Some records suggest bakers understood starter very well, passing knowledge from parent to child. Others emphasize the ritual's covering, tapping, even blessing the dough as integral to the process. Either way, the act of waiting was more than idolit, was vigilance. You lean closer, noticing the texture's subtle shift. The top of the dough feels airy and soft under your fingers, but not so soft that it would collapse. The center is still firm, a reminder of the hours of kneading and folding. You press lightly, feel resistance, and pull back. The dough responds, yielding slightly but holding its shape. It is alive, obedient in a way, yet independent. A second cup of ale in hand, you reflect on how odd this all seems. So much effort, so much attention just to feed people a staple they consume every day. Yet, every step, grinding, fetching, kneading, now waiting is interwoven with survival, tradition, and a hint of magic. You realize why bread held such symbolic power in medieval life. It was not just nourishment, it was labor made tangible, life made edible. And here comes a third light joke for the day. If you stared at your phone for as long as you watched this dough, it might grow into an actual loaf of bread. Not quite, but you see the point. In this village, time moves differently. Slow, deliberate, purposeful. Watching dough rise is a meditation, a reminder that the world doesn't always bend to human urgency. By mid-morning, sunlight slants through the small window, highlighting flour dust motes drifting lazily in the air. They shimmer like tiny galaxies suspended in a quiet universe. You watch, mesmerized, as the dough has almost doubled in size. The surface is taut, smooth, promising. You tap it, lightly springy. You press a finger gently into it resilient. The dough responds, alive, ready for the next step. The baker nods. Almost ready for the oven, he says. You stare, still in awe of this seemingly simple transformation. You realize how deceptive simplicity can be. Bread is never simple. It's a slow dance of biology, chemistry, and human endurance. Every loaf carries within it hours of toil, centuries of knowledge, and a surprising amount of magic. A small argument breaks out in the village outside. Someone insists the dough rising is a sign of rain. Another claims it's an omen of good harvest. You shake your head, smiling. Medieval villages thrive on such debates as much as on bread itself. Every loaf, every bubble becomes part of the ongoing conversation between humans and their environment. You stretch, taking a deep breath. The dough rests. You rest too, in tandem, feeling the calm settle after the physical and mental exertion. Outside, life moves on. Inside, the dough waits, guarded by cloth, by careful hands, by the rhythms of a day that refuses to be hurried. And in that waiting, you begin to understand the secret lesson of medieval bread. Patience is not passive, it is active, vigilant, respectful of processes larger than yourself. The dough continues its silent labor. You watch, a participant and observer. Your hands are free now, but your mind remains tethered to the transformation before you. Every puff, every swell is a heartbeat, a whisper of life. You realize how rare it is in modern times to witness such quiet miracles, where time itself seems to bend to the needs of something fragile yet resilient. By late morning, the dough has reached a state of readiness. The baker lifts the cloth, checks the texture, and murmurs in satisfaction. It is not perfect, it is never perfect, but it is ready. For now, your role in this stage concludes. The next phase awaits. The communal oven, the fire, and the slow, steady bake that will finally turn these humble ingredients into sustenance. You sit back, exhausted, aware of the hours of quiet vigilance spent alongside the dough. Sweat, flour, and the subtle ache of muscles remind you of the journey so far. You think of the village watching, of neighbors whispering, of cats prowling, and you marvel at the living, breathing wonder in front of you. A simple mound of dough, rising slowly, promising life in the form of bread. The dough has risen and rested, its pale, its pillowy surface promising sustenance, and now the next trial awaits. The communal oven. You follow the baker down the narrow, uneven lane to the oven, its squat stone structure looming like a blackened sentinel at the edge of the village. Smoke curls lazily from its top vent, carrying with it the faint, almost addictive smell of charred wood and yesterday's baked bread. The stone is so dark from centuries of use that it seems alive, absorbing heat, memories, and perhaps even gossip from the village. You step closer, aware that what awaits inside is not just baking, but transformation. Dough into bread, effort into sustenance. The oven is no ordinary appliance. It is a hub of village life, simultaneously practical, social, and symbolic. Villagers often gather around it, whispering critiques, comparing techniques, and observing the baker's skill. You notice a pair of women in the distance, arms folded, debating whether the bread today will rise properly or collapse. Their voices carry over the morning mist, soft but persistent. "He added too much water again," one whispers, shaking her head. The other counters, "No. He knows the starter better than anyone." You can't help but smile at the subtle, ongoing drama surrounding something as humble as bread. Historians still argue whether these communal ovens were primarily a matter of efficiency or control. In some towns, lords centralized baking to collect fees and maintain oversight. In others, sharing one large oven was simply practical, saving fuel and labor. Whatever the reason, it is clear that the oven is the heartbeat of the village, a place where skill, patience, and ritual converge. You step closer, feeling the waves of heat that radiate from the stone. The baker's hands move with practiced precision, shoveling aside embers and ash to reveal the glowing bed of coals beneath. Sparks leap, tiny orange insects dancing on the edge of your vision, and you adjust instinctively, careful not to let them singe your sleeves. Every motion counts. Too much fire, and the dough will burn. Too little, and it will remain dense and doughy. There is no room for error here. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval ovens were often fired for hours to heat the thick stone walls thoroughly. The coals were then pushed aside or removed, leaving residual heat to bake multiple loaves. Timing and temperature management were crucial, as uneven heat could ruin an entire day's work. You suddenly appreciate that just popping it in the oven is a privilege of the modern age. The baker grabs a long wooden peel, its surface worn smooth from centuries of use, and slides it under a loaf. The dough hisses as it meets the stone floor, releasing a puff of steam. You can almost hear the sigh of relief, as if the bread itself recognizes the heat as both punishment and promise. Your muscles ache from carrying logs, hauling water, and kneading dough. And yet, now you must focus again, feeding the fire and monitoring the flames. Quirky tidbit: some medieval bakers believed tossing a pinch of flour into the flames protected the bread from mischievous spirits. Sparks flew upward when they did so, and the villagers claimed the bread would rise higher and taste sweeter. You watch as the baker sprinkles a light dusting over the glowing coals, imagining the tiny flour sprites dancing in the heat. The fire roars as you feed another log into the hearth. Its weight is heavier than it looks. The heat sears your skin, and you flinch as a spark leaps toward your face. The baker glances at you, lips twitching in something like amusement. "Careful," he murmurs, though you sense he would let you burn if it meant learning. You clutch the log, rotate it, and slide it gently onto the firebed. Sparks hiss, smoke swirls, and the air grows thick and heady. Historians still debate whether villagers relied more on guild-trained bakers or on communal labor. In some regions, a master baker oversaw apprentices, while in others, villagers rotated duties, learning through trial and error. The oven was a school, a workplace, and a stage for small dramas that unfolded daily. Arguments over loaves, accusations of shortcuts, or the gentle teasing that always accompanies shared labor. You adjust embers with the poker, feeling their glow warm your hands through the cloth you've wrapped around them. The flames are unpredictable, licking at the oven walls, hissing at logs that resist combustion. You lean closer, inhaling the scent of resin, char, and yeast mingling in a symphony of rustic aromas. It is pungent, acrid, sweet, and oddly comforting all at once. The baker's daughter fans the smoke, guiding it away from the loaves and her own eyes. Her movements are practiced, graceful, and efficient, and you struggle to keep up. One wrong adjustment, one misdirected puff of smoke, and the loaves might scorch or fail to bake properly. You realize the fire is not just a tool, it is a living partner in this ancient dance. A local cat slinks by, tail high, eyes glittering with mischief. You freeze as it pads toward the oven. The baker shoos it away with a swift motion, muttering, "Not today. Pause, stay out of my kingdom." You chuckle quietly, imagining a medieval version of a feline ninja attempting to steal your bread. Every creature in this village seems to understand the oven's importance, even if they interpret it in their own quirky ways. The logs snap and crackle as they burn, sending up occasional sparks that illuminate the blackened stone walls. You feed more wood into the fire, rotate embers, and watch the heat swell. Sweat drips down your back, stinging your eyes, but the air is thick and fragrant enough that it almost masks the discomfort. You are learning quickly that vigilance is as essential as labor. One misstep and the loaves' hours of work and hope could be ruined. Another historical aside: some ovens were massive enough to bake dozens of loaves at a time, while others were small, forcing bakers to stagger batches carefully. The baker adjusts logs and coals with the precision of a conductor, orchestrating heat and timing to ensure each batch emerges golden, crusty, and edible. You marvel at how something so simple as bread requires this complex choreography. Hours pass in a rhythm of feeding fire, adjusting embers, and checking loaves. Your muscles scream from constant motion, sweat clings to your skin, and smoke licks at your eyes. Yet, in between moments of intense labor, you find yourself mesmerized by the glow of the fire, the rise of steam from the first loaves, and the hypnotic dance of sparks. It is dangerous, exhausting, and oddly serene all at once. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, bakers would mark their loaves with symbols before baking. These stamps acted like personal signatures, charms, or even a way to ward off ill luck. You watch the baker press a small emblem into the dough before it enters the oven. In a world of uncertainty, this tiny act feels like reassurance. A ritual ensuring the bread's safe passage from dough to sustenance. The heat grows intense. You lean back momentarily, taking a breath. Outside, the village stirs further. Children run through the mud, chickens squawk, and distant voices carry. Inside, you are cocooned in smoke, heat, and aroma. Your attention fixed entirely on the oven and the golden transformation inside. The smell is almost intoxicating, promising comfort and survival in equal measure. Finally, the baker signals the moment of triumph. He uses the peel to remove the first batch of loaves, setting them carefully on a wooden table to cool. Steam rises, curling like smoke from a tiny chimney, filling the space with the unmistakable scent of freshly baked bread. Villagers outside pause, noses twitching, savoring the aroma before the loaves even reach their hands. You step back, sweat-drenched, arms aching, eyes stinging from smoke. The labor is immense, but the reward is immediate. The bread is golden, crusty, and full of life. You can't help but smile, realizing that every step from grinding to kneading to tending the fire culminates here. It is labor made tangible, patience made edible, survival made fragrant. And in that quiet moment, with the oven cooling, embers glowing faintly, and the first loaves stacked neatly, you understand why medieval bread was more than just food. It was ritual, community, and a testament to human resilience, all bound together in the heat of a stone hearth. The baker leans back slightly, letting a satisfied breath escape as he surveys the glowing oven. You step closer, bracing yourself against the residual heat that radiates from the blackened stones. The fire inside has done its work. The loaves transformed from pale, fragile dough into golden, crusty sustenance. Rest within the oven like trophies of human patience. Steam curls from each loaf, carrying the yeasty, smoky aroma that defines morning in this village. You inhale deeply, almost dizzy with the richness of it. This is the smell of survival, of centuries-old routines, of small communities waking to the promise of food. The baker retrieves the long wooden peel, its surface smooth from years of repetitive motion. You watch as he slides it under a loaf, feeling the soft resistance give way beneath the crust. The loaf hisses slightly, releasing a puff of steam that curls into your face, and you reflexively step back, coughing. There is something almost alive in the transformation, a loaf rising, sighing, releasing heat and aroma as if exhaling its gratitude. You realize that removing bread from a medieval oven is not a simple act. It is a ritual, delicate and precise. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In medieval villages, bread was often removed immediately after baking and placed on wooden boards or straw mats to cool. This cooling process allowed the interior crumb to set properly, preventing sogginess and ensuring the crust stayed crisp. Villagers were acutely aware that improper cooling could ruin hours of labor, and the baker's reputation often rested on these final, meticulous steps. You help lift the first loaf, carefully sliding it from the oven floor onto a wooden table that has been lined with fresh straw. The texture is astonishing. A golden crust, firm but not rock hard, giving slightly under pressure. The baker's hands are steady, and he demonstrates the gentle rocking motion necessary to coax the bread off the hot stone without burning oneself or tearing the loaf. You mimic him, fumbling at first, sweat dripping from your brow, but gradually finding the rhythm. Quirky tidbit. Some bakers in Northern Europe would sprinkle a few grains of sand or ashes on their boards to prevent sticking, claiming it also kept mischievous spirits from interfering with the bread. You chuckle as you carefully place the loaves, imagining tiny invisible sprites dancing among the crusts. The village begins to stir. You can hear the faint clatter of pots in distant cottages, chickens squawking, and children's voices echoing from narrow alleyways. Curious neighbors peer toward the oven, noses twitching at the intoxicating scent. Some clap quietly in anticipation. Others murmur to themselves about which loaf looks fluffiest. You sense a subtle pressure. The first loaf isn't just bread, it is a public performance. Every crackle, every sigh of steam is being judged, albeit silently. Historians still debate whether cooling bread was purely practical or ritualistic. Some argue that the careful stacking and handling was merely about preserving quality. Others suggest it had symbolic weight, showing respect for the labor, the grains, and the elemental power of fire. In either case, you feel that the baker treats these loaves almost as sacred objects, worthy of care and attention. The baker begins removing the next batch. Steam hisses as each loaf leaves the stone, and you step back instinctively, hands poised to assist. You notice his daughter carrying small straw mats, laying them beneath the loaves as if arranging a tiny, fragrant mosaic. Each placement is deliberate. Not too close, not too far, allowing air to circulate and the bread to cool evenly. You realize the process is a delicate dance between heat, air, and gravity. The rhythm settles over you. Peel in hand, loaf lifted, placed, adjusted, repeated. Time seems to warp, seconds stretch, minutes collapse. And yet, every motion is purposeful. Your muscles ache from repeated lifting and bending. Sweat burns your eyes, and yet there is a strange, meditative quality to the work. The village's expectations hover invisibly over you. But instead of panic, you feel focus, clarity, and a faint, inexplicable joy. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, bakers would lightly tap each loaf with a knuckle to test its readiness, listening for the hollow sound that indicated proper baking. You try it on a particularly large loaf, and the subtle hollow thunk feels like a secret handshake with the past. The baker smiles faintly at your attempt, approving without words. You stack the loaves carefully, arranging them to cool faster and to prevent accidental tipping. Some of the smaller loaves sit atop larger ones, their crusts radiating warmth to their neighbors. Steam rises in delicate columns, curling toward the rafters of the oven courtyard. The smell has grown intoxicating, a mix of charred stone, smoke, and sweet, yeasty bread that fills your nostrils and clings to your hair and clothes. Villagers outside sniff the air like hounds tracking prey, their anticipation almost palpable. Historical fact: in colder months, bread was sometimes cooled near a sunny wall or by an open window, the airflow helping set the crust and ensuring the crumb didn't become damp or moldy. You glance toward a patch of sunlight hitting the courtyard stones, imagining how natural ventilation aided the baker's work long before the invention of thermometers and timers. You pause for a moment, hands resting on a straw-covered table, inhaling deeply. The village is alive with quiet murmurs, occasional laughter, and the distant bray of a donkey. Yet here, amid smoke, heat, and the rhythm of cooling loaves, time feels suspended. You notice the small details: a loose ember drifting lazily in the air, the faint crack of crust cooling, the heat radiating from freshly removed bread. The experience is visceral, grounding, and oddly comforting. The baker adjusts the next batch, carefully using his peel to rotate loaves that are slightly darker on one side, ensuring even cooling. You follow suit, trying not to drop a loaf or scald yourself. Sweat drips into your eyes, stinging but the tactile feedback, the give of the crust. The faint warmth of the crumbs rewarding. You feel connected to centuries of bakers who performed this same dance, hands blackened with soot, hearts focused on communal survival. Quirky tidbit: some bakers would leave small, deliberately imperfect loaves at the edge of the cooling table, claiming they were for the oven spirits or mischievous village sprites. You watch one sacrificial loaf steam gently at the side, imagining tiny invisible diners nibbling away, and it makes the long labor feel a little magical. The rhythm continues. Peel, lift, place, steam curls. Villagers inch closer, some offering a nod or a quiet thank you as they glimpse the golden loaves. You are aware that this is more than baking. It is ceremony. The oven, the fire, the dough. The village, they are in dialogue, a continuous cycle of work, expectation, and reward. Historians still argue whether bakers in small villages held more social prestige for their skill or bore more scrutiny for potential failures. Either way, Their labor was central to daily life. As you slide another loaf onto a straw mat, the weight of this responsibility settles in your chest. Every loaf represents sustenance, pride, and the rhythm of communal survival. Finally, the last batch is removed. The table is a mosaic of golden, steaming loaves, each slightly different, but all perfectly edible. The baker wipes his brow, hands blackened with soot, and leans back, satisfied. Villagers begin to approach, voices hushed with anticipation, fingers twitching to lift the first warm loaves. You step back, chest heaving, realizing the hours of labor from grinding grain to kneading to tending fire have culminated in this fragrant triumph. The aroma is irresistible, filling every corner of the village, mingling with the crisp morning air. Dogs sniff eagerly, children wriggle their noses, and elders murmur with quiet satisfaction. You take a final breath of the smoky, yeasty air, understanding fully that this moment the careful removal and cooling of loaves is as critical as any other in the bread-making process. As the baker signals for the villagers to begin collecting their loaves, you step back, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and pride. The process is complete, yet ongoing. Bread will be eaten, crumbs will fall, and the cycle will begin anew tomorrow. The oven cools slowly, embers fading, smoke drifting lazily upward, and the village collectively inhales, savoring the product of your labor. In this quiet aftermath, you realize that bread is more than nourishment. It is ritual, skill, community, and survival intertwined. Each loaf a testament to patience, labor, and the intimate relationship between human hands and fire. With the last loaf gently set on the cooling table, the baker straightens and wipes his soot-darkened hands on a rag that has seen better days. The oven's residual warmth radiates into the courtyard, mixing with the crisp morning air and carrying the faint aroma of smoke, yeast, and crusty bread. You step closer, palms clammy, heart racing a bit from both excitement and exhaustion. This is the moment you've been waiting for: the distribution. The villagers have been holding their collective breath, noses twitching, eyes darting from loaf to loaf, eager for their share of the day's sustenance. The baker picks up a medium-sized loaf, golden brown and slightly lopsided, in a way that somehow makes it look handcrafted rather than mass-produced. You notice that imperfections add character, the kind that makes a loaf feel alive. He gestures for you to help, and together you lift it carefully. Villagers step forward, anticipation tangible. Some bow slightly in gratitude, others keep their hands folded, silent but expectant. A few chuckle, whispering jokes about the size or shape of the loaves. You can almost hear the mental scorecards being updated. Golden crust, 5 points. Shape, 3 points. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In medieval villages, distributing bread was not just a matter of convenience. It was an organized ritual. Some towns maintained strict schedules, with bakers marking each loaf for a specific household or allocating portions according to social rank. Bread was survival, and controlling its distribution maintained both fairness and social order. You feel the weight of this responsibility in your hands. One loaf handed carelessly could spark suspicion. One given with favoritism could ignite resentment. You slide the loaf into the outstretched hands of an elderly woman, her fingers rough and knuckled from decades of labor. She inhales the aroma deeply, eyes softening with appreciation. "Thank you, Hans," she murmurs, using the baker's name, as though speaking it aloud confirms her entitlement to the bread. You hand the next loaf to a young boy, who can barely lift it but grins with pride, clutching it to his chest like treasure. You realize that each interaction is layered. Gratitude, expectation, pride, and subtle negotiation all rolled into a simple exchange of sustenance. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, bakers would deliberately set aside humble loaves for animals or mischievous spirits, believing that leaving bread behind would appease unseen forces. You watch the baker wink at a small, crooked loaf he places at the edge of the table, imagining the spirits lining up to nibble while villagers collect their portions. The line stretches, villagers murmuring, children shifting from foot to foot, a dog weaving between ankles, tail wagging. You hand loaf after loaf, feeling a rhythm settle over you. Peel, lift, pass, repeat. The smell is intoxicating. The warmth radiates from the bread, from the oven stones, and from the cooperative hum of the village gathering. You start noticing small social dynamics. Neighbors nodding to each other, subtle murmurs of approval or playful critique, small gestures of sharing or teasing. A man comments on the crust of the loaf you handed him, joking that it looks more golden than yesterday's, and the baker smirks knowingly, a silent acknowledgement of effort well executed. Historians still argue whether these public distributions were primarily about fairness or community cohesion. Some suggest that making the process visible reinforced trust and accountability. Everyone saw who received bread, ensuring that no loaf was hoarded or withheld. Others argue it was performative, a ritual that reaffirmed the baker's role and elevated him socially, even if grudgingly. Either way, you sense the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down in this simple act of handing bread to neighbors. You move down the line, noticing the subtleties of each exchange. A young mother receives a loaf, holding it carefully as her baby tugs at her sleeve. You smile, recognizing the quiet joy that comes with providing food for someone else. An older man nods curtly, satisfied, but his eyes twinkle with humor as he jokes about getting 2 loaves today, not 1. The village is alive in this moment, a small ecosystem of anticipation, gratitude, and gentle teasing. And you are at the center of it, hands full of golden bread. Quirky tidbit: in certain towns, villagers would sneak extra loaves home for mischievous siblings or neighbors, leading to playful disputes. You catch a small boy trying to hide a loaf under his cloak, and the baker raises an eyebrow, silently approving the audacity. It is a minor rebellion, harmless and humorous, and it lightens the otherwise serious rhythm of bread distribution. The smell of the loaves blends with the crisp morning air, curling around wooden fences, over stone paths, and into open windows. You notice the way villagers breathe in the aroma, a subtle but undeniable comfort. For many, this scent signals the start of the day, the reassurance that their household will be fed, and that the rhythm of village life continues unbroken. You realize that the act of distribution is not merely practical, it is a form of community glue, binding people together through shared reliance and subtle rituals. Another historical fact: in some villages, bakers maintained ledgers recording which households received bread and in what quantities. This was crucial in times of scarcity, ensuring equitable distribution and preventing disputes. You marvel at the subtle power inherent in a baker's hands. Each loaf handed over represents sustenance, social order, and a quiet measure of influence. Your arms are growing heavy, hands slick with residual flour and sweat. Yet you persist, driven by the rhythm, by the trust placed in you, by the quiet satisfaction of seeing bread pass safely from oven to villager. Each loaf carries with it the labor of hours, the grinding of grain, the kneading, the fire tending, the careful cooling. And now, in this act of distribution, that labor transforms into human connection, visible in the small gestures, murmurs, and glances exchanged along the line. You hand a particularly large loaf to the village smith, who grins and claps you on the shoulder. "This one will last till supper," he says, and you feel a rush of satisfaction. Small children bounce excitedly as they clutch their bread, learning early the rhythms of anticipation, reward, and gratitude. You watch as neighbors whisper quietly to each other about crust texture, loaf size, and subtle differences in flavor. Each observation is part of an unspoken communal ledger, a record of skill, taste, and social awareness. Quirky tidbit: in some areas, bakers would place tiny symbols or initials on certain loaves to indicate extra care or superior quality. You notice the baker stamping a small design on a round loaf and imagine villagers spotting the mark, delighting in its hidden message. These minor rituals add depth, humor, and meaning to the otherwise utilitarian task of feeding a community. Hours pass in a gentle blur. Loaves are passed, hands are cleaned, children squeal when they finally get to unwrap their bread, and even the village dogs seem to settle in satisfaction at the edges of the courtyard. The baker moves methodically, never hurried, ensuring fairness and quality with each transfer. You've noticed that distributing bread is both delicate and commanding, requiring strength, grace, and social awareness simultaneously. Historians still debate whether the ceremonial aspects of bread distribution, such as visible lines and communal observation, were primarily about reinforcing social hierarchies or fostering cohesion. Some argue that the baker's public role subtly elevated his status. Others suggest it reinforced equality, ensuring all households saw that the vital resource of bread was shared fairly. You watch as the villagers collect their loaves, nodding politely to each other, smiles softening minor frustrations, and feel that the act accomplishes both in a surprisingly human way. Finally, the last loaf is handed over. The baker leans back, surveying the courtyard with quiet satisfaction. The villagers chatter, laugh, and disperse, some heading to chores, others lingering to exchange gossip or marvel at the golden crusts in their hands. You step aside, wiping your palms, shoulders aching, heart full. The aroma lingers, a tangible reminder of labor, patience, and community. As you watch the last few villagers depart, bread tucked securely on their arms, you realize the profound simplicity of the task. Sliding loaves into waiting hands is both the conclusion and continuation of an ancient ritual. Each gesture carries weight: sustenance, social cohesion, ritual respect, and quiet joy. The village has been fed, the fire has cooled, and yet the process will begin anew tomorrow. The cycle of dough, heat, labor, and distribution unbroken. The courtyard quiets, leaving only the faint scent of yeast, smoke, and warmth hanging in the morning air. You inhale deeply, chest rising with satisfaction, and realize that the act of distributing bread is a delicate choreography of humanity, connecting labor to nourishment, community to survival, hands to hearts. And in this, you have been a participant, witness, and almost a guardian of life's most essential sustenance. The village courtyard begins to fill with life as the first loaves reach tables and doorsteps. Sunlight spills across the frost-tinged stones, casting long shadows that stretch lazily as the morning warms. Villagers sit in clusters or stand in small groups, tearing into crusty loaves with hands roughened by labor, knuckles smeared with soil or calluses. Step back slightly, watching the quiet choreography of breakfast unfold. This is the moment when labor meets reward, when dough transformed by fire nourishes the body and spirit alike. The air is filled with the mingling scents of fresh bread, morning dew, and the faint smoke lingering from the oven. Children squeal in delight as they bite into warm loaves, crumb dusting their sleeves and the stone below. You notice a young girl holding a small piece of crust like a prized gem, nibbling delicately, while her siblings wrestle for larger portions. Nearby, an older man breaks his bread into small squares, dipping it into a bowl of milk or ale. Every bite is deliberate, a tactile meditation on flavor, texture, and survival. Historians still argue whether the medieval breakfast was primarily practical or socially performative. Some suggest that the act of gathering to eat freshly baked bread reinforced community cohesion, a shared ritual of sustenance and observation. Others claim it was a private necessity, a simple act of fueling the day with communal presence more incidental than intentional. As you watch, it's clear that it is both. The village breathes as one body, yet each individual experiences their meal intimately. The baker leans against the edge of the courtyard, hands still streaked with soot, eyes quietly observing. He watches how the loaves are handled, how quickly they are consumed, and how subtle negotiations unfold. A young boy nudges a loaf toward his sister. An older woman splits hers to share with a neighbor. These small acts, tiny gestures of generosity, remind you that bread is more than food. It is a medium for connection, a catalyst for social ritual that shapes relationships as much as it satisfies hunger. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, leftover crumbs were saved for birds, cats, or even mischievous spirits. Children might toss fragments into the air, giggling as animals and birds scrambled to snatch them mid-flight. You notice small crumbs littering the courtyard, a playful layer atop the serious business of nourishment. Even amidst labor and structure, there is room for whimsy. You move slowly along the perimeter, observing the subtle dynamics at play. Families sit in proximity, neighbors exchange whispers, and occasional laughter rings out. One man remarks to another about the crust's perfect thickness, eliciting a soft chuckle. You realize that breakfast is as much about these interactions as it is about sustenance. Every shared comment, every nod, every smile reinforces unspoken social bonds, turning a simple meal into a living tapestry of village life. Historical fact. The timing and rhythm of bread consumption were often tightly integrated with agricultural schedules. Farmers needed energy early in the day for labor-intensive tasks. Children required sustenance before errands or schooling. Older villagers relied on the morning meal for strength. Bread, baked and distributed efficiently, served as the anchor for the day's activities, its presence regulating energy, labor, and attention across the community. You pause by a small bench where a mother is helping her child pull apart a loaf. The child's fingers press into the soft interior, tearing pieces away, eyes wide with fascination and joy. The mother smiles patiently, guiding the small hands, teaching not just the mechanics of eating, but the care and respect owed to sustenance. You watch this exchange quietly, realizing that centuries of practice and tradition are embedded in every gesture, every careful movement. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, villagers would whisper to the bread before eating, a small charm or blessing meant to thank the grain and honor the baker. You imagine the mother quietly murmuring a thanks as her child bites into the warm loaf, and it seems fitting, a private acknowledgement of labor and life. The baker steps forward, picking up a partially eaten loaf to inspect it subtly. His eyes scan the crumb, the crust, the texture, the rate at which it cools. You notice that he is both participant and observer, measuring success not just in loaves, but in the reactions and satisfaction of the villagers. Every nod, every exclamation of delight, every satisfied sigh is a form of validation. The labor of hours, grinding, kneading, tending fire, distributing is measured in these small human responses. You wander through the courtyard, noticing the diversity of eating styles. Some tear chunks quickly, wolfing them down in large bites. Others nibble methodically, savoring texture and aroma. You see a boy carefully breaking off pieces to share with a younger sibling. A man dips a small square into milk, careful not to soak it. Each action feels intentional, guided by instinct, habit, and observation. Even in a simple act as consuming bread, the intricacies of human behavior emerge vividly. Historical fact. Medieval villages often relied on communal labor for both baking and eating. It was not uncommon for families to wait for the entire batch to cool before dividing loaves, ensuring equitable portions and preventing disputes. The act of waiting itself became ritualized, a shared experience of anticipation and communal patience. You notice similar rhythms in the current scene. Villagers eyeing each other as much as the bread itself, negotiating fairness with quiet glances. Quirky tidbit. Some bakers or villagers would lightly rub a bit of honey or herbs into leftover crumbs before feeding them to animals, turning a simple act into a playful ritual. You notice a cat weaving among the tables, sniffing at crumbs, and imagine the subtle humor these little traditions brought to otherwise serious labor. You step closer to a group of older villagers sitting on a bench, sharing their loaves and stories. They speak quietly of the weather, of harvests past, and of minor disputes resolved through negotiation. You realize that the bread facilitates dialogue as much as digestion. It's a medium for memory, reflection, and negotiation. Even silence is part of the ritual. Chewing, breathing, and savoring connect each person to the community and to the labor behind the bread. The baker watches from the edge of the courtyard, adjusting his posture as he notes each reaction. You sense pride in his gaze, not just in the outcome of the loaves, but in the effect they have on the community. One young boy offers a nod of thanks, his eyes bright. And you realize that these small acknowledgments are the true reward for centuries of labor embedded in the craft. Historians still debate the role of communal breakfast in social hierarchy. Did early morning meals reinforce status with certain households served first, or did they cultivate egalitarian bonds? The courtyard before you seems to answer both. Distribution follows both tradition and subtle hierarchy, yet shared laughter, gestures, and casual exchanges dissolve strict barriers. Breakfast is at once practical, social, and performative. You pause, taking a deep breath, inhaling the lingering aroma of bread, smoke, and human activity. The courtyard is a living tableau of village life. Children bouncing in delight, elders nodding sagely, adults exchanging hushed comments, all anchored by the sustenance of golden loaves. You feel the weight of labor, the fulfillment of effort, and the subtle joy of human connection, all mediated through the humble act of eating. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, it was customary to leave a small corner of bread on the table at the end of breakfast for wandering travelers or strangers. You notice a few leftover fragments carefully placed near the edges of tables, a silent acknowledgement of generosity and communal care. Even as labor concludes, the village ensures continuity, kindness, and respect for the unexpected. As the morning wears on, the courtyard gradually empties. Some villagers carry loaves to their homes, children reluctantly leaving crumbs behind, dogs padding lazily after them. The baker and you remain, surveying the aftermath. Empty tables, faint smoke rising from stones, and the satisfaction etched on faces. You reflect on the labor it took to reach this point, hours of grinding, kneading, firing, cooling, and distributing. How that effort manifests in simple, universal human responses. Finally, the courtyard quiets. The warmth of the morning sun softens shadows, and the aroma of bread lingers faintly, a gentle reminder of toil, patience, and reward. You step back, shoulders easing, muscles relaxing, mind buzzing with the small, profound realizations of village life. Bread, labor, community, ritual, and survival are all intertwined here, visible in every glance, gesture, and bite. You feel honored to witness it, participating in a cycle that stretches back centuries, yet alive in every heartbeat of the present moment. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long amber shadows across the village. You trudge along the worn paths, chest still full of the morning's aromas. Yet your mind loops back to the rhythm of the day, kneading, tending the oven, distributing loaves, and observing breakfast. Each task, each gesture, each small interaction has left an imprint, a subtle vibration in the air that speaks of labor and care. Now, as the village starts to quiet, the daily cycle of bread-making begins its evening echo. The courtyard is nearly empty. Children retreat indoors, their laughter lingering faintly like the last notes of a song. A stray dog pads lazily after them, sniffing at the few crumbs still scattered on stones. Smoke drifts faintly from the dying embers of the communal oven. The scent of charred wood mixing with lingering yeast and the faint sweetness of bread that cooled hours ago. You pause, letting the mixture wash over you, feeling the intangible residue of labor and human connection. The baker leans against a wooden post, shoulders sagging slightly, eyes scanning the village as if taking stock not just of bread, but of life itself. He wipes soot from his hands and brushes ash from his sleeves, the marks of the day etched into his linen and skin. You notice the subtle grace of his movements, styled but precise, deliberate yet unhurried, quiet mastery forged through years of practice and necessity. Each small motion carries memory, skill, and survival. Historians still argue whether the daily routines of medieval villagers were imposed by necessity or shaped by tradition. Some suggest that bread-making dictated the rhythm of life, forcing a structure upon labor, rest, and social interaction. Others claim it was more flexible, adapted to seasons, festivals, and the whims of local masters. Observing the evening quiet, you sense both: the structure of routine paired with the improvisation of human life, the interplay of necessity and habit. You wander past cottages, peering into half-open windows. Families are gathered for evening meals, simple affairs of bread, cheese, and ale. Yet each action echoes the morning's labor. The loaves you help distribute are being torn, shared, and eaten. A young boy lifts a piece high for his sister to reach, and a mother smiles faintly, whispering gentle instruction. You realize that the day's work reverberates in these small, domestic acts, a chain of effort and reward extending from dawn to dusk. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believed that speaking kindly to bread while it cooled or offering a silent thank you imbued it with a protective spirit, ensuring the household would not go hungry. You watch an elderly woman whisper softly over her loaf, a tiny ritual unnoticed by anyone but her, yet somehow comforting to witness. Even as the day winds down, the subtle interplay of superstition, care, and labor persists. The baker collects the few remaining crumbs from the courtyard, sweeping them into a small basket for the animals. You follow, helping to gather the remnants of the day's efforts. It strikes you as a quiet form of stewardship, a way to respect the grain and the labor it took to transform it into nourishment. Nothing is wasted. Everything has its place, from human consumption to animal sustenance, from ceremonial marks to accidental crumbs. You pause by the old stone oven, its walls now cooled, its mouth dark and silent. The fire that dominated your morning and shaped the rhythm of the village is gone, leaving only warmth embedded in stone and memory. The baker examines the oven briefly, checking for cracks, soot buildup, or lingering embers, as if the structure itself is a partner in this daily ritual. You understand that fire is not just energy, it is continuity, a link between generations of bakers, a pulse that keeps the village alive. Historical fact: communal ovens were often maintained year-round, even in winter, with careful attention to temperature, moisture, and structural integrity. A neglected oven could mean ruined loaves, village hunger, and even social tension. The baker's vigilance ensures survival, community cohesion, and the perpetuation of centuries-old knowledge. You feel the weight of this responsibility, extending from the hands of the living to the legacy of those who baked before. You wander along the edge of the village, noticing the subtle signs of evening settling: chickens roosting, smoke curling from hearths, the distant toll of a bell marking a time unknown but universally acknowledged. Villagers exchange quiet words, some carrying the day's bread home, others preparing for chores or conversation by firesides. You notice how the mundane act of consuming bread shapes behavior: patience, generosity, observation, subtle negotiation, and the reinforcement of social bonds. Quirky tidbit: in some regions, the baker would leave a small loaf or a few crumbs on the doorstep as a nightly offering to household spirits or wandering travelers, a gesture of protection and goodwill. You imagine the baker subtly placing a leftover piece on a step as he walks back, unseen by villagers but full of intention. Even after labor, there is a dance of magic, ritual, and care. You pause at a bench, sitting down to observe the village one last time before dusk fully claims the streets. The scent of the day's labor lingers in your hair and clothes. Warmth radiates from the stones where loaves cooled hours ago. Conversations ripple softly in the air, punctuated by laughter, clinking utensils, and the occasional bark of a dog. You realize that bread, its creation, distribution, and consumption shapes more than nutrition. It shapes time, attention, human behavior, and memory. Historians still debate whether bread's centrality to daily life was primarily a matter of necessity or symbolic meaning. Some argue that the mundane acts of milling, kneading, baking, and sharing reinforced hierarchy, duty, and social control. Others suggest that bread making was more egalitarian, binding communities through shared dependence and collective labor. As you watch, it is clear that it is both, a practical necessity infused with ritual, observation, and subtle human dynamics. The sun dips lower, the shadows lengthen, and a faint hush settles over the village. You rise from the bench, feeling the fatigue of a full day, but also the quiet exhilaration of participating in an ancient, ongoing rhythm. The baker lingers nearby, surveying the remaining loaves, checking the courtyard, and occasionally nodding to villagers passing by. There is pride in his posture, a subtle satisfaction that is quiet but unmistakable. Quirky tidbit. Some bakers kept a tiny personal loaf hidden for themselves, a reward for enduring the long, grueling hours. Often eaten slowly in the quiet of evening. You imagine the baker slipping a small piece into his pocket or nibbling it as he leans against the post, savoring his labor in private. Even amidst duty, there is room for small, human pleasures. As the evening deepens, the village's rhythm softens. Footsteps grow lighter, voices quieter, and the lingering aromas of bread and smoke fade into the dusk. You walk along the empty paths, reflecting on the cycles of labor you've observed. Grinding grain, kneading dough, tending fire, distributing loaves, watching breakfast, and finally witnessing the day's closure. Each stage is a link in a chain connected by care, skill, and communal reliance. Historical fact: many medieval villages relied on strict, seasonal, and daily rhythms dictated by bread making. Grain harvesting, grinding, kneading, and baking all had to align with agricultural cycles and social expectations. Bread was literally the measure of time and survival. Observing the village now, you understand the invisible scaffolding that supports these routines. Finally, you pause at the village's edge, looking back at the courtyard now bathed in the fading glow of sunset. The baker leans against the oven post, surveying his domain with quiet satisfaction. Children's laughter has faded. Doors close one by one, and the subtle aroma of the day's labor lingers in the air. You take a deep, slow breath, aware of the human rhythms, the labor, the sustenance, and the quiet triumph embedded in this cycle. Bread, you realize, is more than food. It is life, ritual, and community. The village has grown quiet. Doors are closed, windows glow faintly with firelight, and the courtyard lies in stillness. Only the faintest traces of ash and bread scent drift in the air, a reminder of the work that shaped the day. You stand at the edge of the lane, letting the silence settle around you. The rhythm of medieval life reveals itself not in grand battles or dramatic moments, but in the quiet persistence of daily labor. From the dawn's first kneading to the oven's fading embers, bread structured time, nourished bodies, and bound communities together. Every step, grinding, mixing, tending fire, sharing was both necessity and ritual. To make bread was to participate in something larger: survival, tradition, and the slow continuity of life itself. As you breathe in the cool night air, you recognize that this cycle is not entirely gone. Even now, the scent of bread fresh from an oven carries memory, comfort, and meaning. We may no longer gather at a communal oven, but the human impulse remains: to create, to share, to sustain one another with food and care. You take one last look at the village, now bathed in moonlight. The baker has gone inside. The oven sleeps. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again, as it has for centuries, and as it will in new forms for centuries more. Bread endures stone by stone, grain by grain, loaf by loaf, binding people across time. And in that endurance, we glimpse not just the past, but something timeless: